Good evening, I'm Bill Hemmer, and tonight for Bret Baier. The fate of President Trump's immigration order is now in the hands of 3 judges in San Francisco. A decision from that panel is expected quickly, perhaps within hours. But the eventual decision is likely headed for the highest court in the country. So then, where are we at the moment? Chief White House correspondent John Roberts starts us off tonight from the North Lawn. And John, good evening to you.
Bill, good evening to you. I'm looking at the just filed brief that the White House has filed with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The argument they make is that the executive order is a lawful exercise of the president's authority over the entry of aliens into the United States and the admission of refugees. The president is determined to have his extreme vetting executive order reinstated and is confident that even in the notoriously liberal Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, his argument will win the day. In its appeal to the Ninth Circuit Court in San Francisco, the Justice Department argues that the president acted within his constitutional statutory powers in implementing the immigration ban, and that because the measure is only temporary, he was well within his authority to do it. Judge Andrew Napolitano believes the president is on a solid legal footing under the statute.
It specifically grants to the president the authority to suspend the immigration status of any person, class of people, or group of people based upon the president's judgment alone that their immigration might adversely affect public health, public safety, or national security. And that's what President Trump has done.
The attorneys general of Washington State and Minnesota, who filed the suit in Seattle's federal district court, argue that lifting the restraining order against the extreme vetting program would, quote, unleash chaos again and inflict harm on certain individuals, separating families, stranding our university students and faculty, and barring travel. 16 other Democratic attorneys general today threw their support behind them. And they were joined by former secretaries of state Madeleine Albright and John Kerry, former CIA directors Michael Hayden and Michael Morrell, and others who wrote that reinstating the travel ban could, quote, do long-term damage to our national security and foreign policy interests, endangering U.S. troops in the field and disrupting counterterrorism and national security partnerships. At CENTCOM headquarters in Florida today, the nexus in the fight against terror, there was enthusiastic support for the president's plan.
We need strong programs so that people that love us and want to love our country and will end up loving our country are allowed in, not people that want to destroy us and destroy our country.
There was also plenty of support for President Trump's order to review military readiness, particularly his pledge to give the military the tools it needs to fight terrorism and other enemies across the globe. But the president ran into a buzzsaw of criticism over comments he made about Vladimir Putin on Sunday in his pre-Super Bowl interview.
He's a killer, though.
Putin's a killer.
A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent? You think our country's so innocent?
I don't know of any government leaders that are killers.
Well, take a look at what we've done, too. We've made a lot of mistakes.
Democrats, even some Republicans, saw that as drawing a moral equivalency between Russia and the United States. Senator Marco Rubio tweeted, when has a Democratic political activist been poisoned by the GOP or vice versa? We are not the same as #Putin. And this from Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse.
There is no moral equivalency between the United States of America, the greatest freedom-loving nation in the history of the world, and the murderous thugs that are in Putin's defense of his cronyism.
The president is walking a fine diplomatic line with Vladimir Putin, hoping to engage his help in the fight against ISIS. And while the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals could possibly rule tonight on the extreme vetting executive order, the White House bill is not expecting a decision until at least sometime tomorrow.
We await on that. Thank you, John Roberts from the White House tonight. Some Republicans are putting distance between themselves and the president's comments about Vladimir Putin. This coming amid reports of growing palace intrigue within the Trump White House. Senior political analyst Brit Hume joins us tonight to talk about that. And Brit, good evening to you.
Hi, Bill. Good to see you.
When you look at this now, how do you analyze how this is coming down at the moment? What explains, or perhaps what's the calculation behind the president's words?
What I think is happening here, Bill, is that Trump has this hunch that he's going to be able to strike some kind of relationship with Vladimir Putin in which they will be allies in the war on terror and fight ISIS together, and that he will have a smooth relationship with him. I don't think he's sure that's going to happen. Indeed, he says he's not sure that's going to happen. But he seems intent on protecting the possibility. Thus, you hear him, refusing to go along with Bill O'Reilly's quite factual assertion that Putin is a killer. In the meantime, though, this is a wonderful example, Bill, of the striking distance between what Trump says and what he and the people around him do. Trump says this silly thing about Putin in which he seems to create a moral equivalence between the Putin regime and our government. And then, in the meantime, however, just a few days ago, Nikki Haley, in her first speech as our UN ambassador, attacks the Russians and makes it very clear that the United States policy, as far as she's concerned, is opposed to what he did in Crimea and elsewhere. So you get this striking contrast between what the people around Trump, and often himself, do and what he sometimes says. He says a lot of silly things. He often does a lot smarter things.
Topic number 2, Britt. What is your sense about what happens with that Ninth Circuit in San Francisco regarding the immigration ruling?
Well, the Ninth Circuit is a left-wing circuit. I don't know which judges are on the panel and where they fall. The law, as far as I can tell, and I've read a lot on this, is very much on the president's side here, which is not to say this is wise policy, but that's not the question. The question is whether the president had the legal right to do what he did, and whether the judge in Seattle who said in the process of issuing a temporary restraining order, which, by the way, does nothing but freeze things until the actual legality of the matter can be adjudicated, whether he had a leg to stand on when he said that the plaintiffs, that is, those who were suing the administration, were likely to prevail on the merits. He didn't really argue why they were going to win on the merits, and I don't think he could have, because I think the chances of a victory by the plaintiffs on the merits are very remote. So I think the administration has a strong case. Whether the Ninth Circuit is likely to uphold it remains to be seen, because the Ninth Circuit is the most reverse circuit of all, and you can never tell what they're going to do out there.
Let's see what happens tonight or tomorrow, based on John Roberts reporting a moment ago. Third topic, Britt. There was a story today in the New York Times that the president is kicked to the side, suggesting a lot of palace intrigue on the inside. Sean Spicer was asked about this on board Air Force One just about 2 hours ago, when he said this.
That story was so riddled with inaccuracies and lies that they owe the president an apology for the way that thing was. There were just literally blatant factual errors, and it's unacceptable to see that kind of reporting, or so-called reporting. That is literally the epitome of fake news.
So reflect on your time at the White House as a reporter there. How does this happen, or does it happen 2 weeks in, Britt?
Well, one aspect of the story was reporting on apparent alleged goings-on late at night in the White House, where the president is, because his wife and son are still in New York alone, and it spoke of him, wandering in his bathrobe and so on. I can tell you this, very, very few people know what a president is doing in the family quarters late at night. And it is hard to imagine that any of them would be talking to the New York Times at this stage. So I think there is ample reason to be skeptical of that story, however interesting it may have been.
Thank you, Britt. Good to see you tonight. Britt Hume with us here. Thank you. Meanwhile, the president telling Bill O'Reilly it could be 2018 before his Obamacare replacement law is ready. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen tells us how that sits with congressional Republicans tonight.
In his Super Bowl Sunday sit-down with Bill O'Reilly, President Trump punted his Obamacare overhaul way down the field.
And maybe it'll take till sometime into next year.
Suddenly, and perhaps remembering previous promises like this one,
As soon as our secretary is approved and gets into the office, we'll be filing a plan.
The president immediately floated a swifter timetable.
I would like to say by the end of the year, at least the rudiments, but we should have something within the year and the following year.
The nominee for Secretary of Health and Human Services, Georgia Congressman Tom Price, is still several days away from a confirmation vote. Even farther away is Seema Verma, the nominee to run the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, who has not yet even had a confirmation hearing. House Speaker Paul Ryan had said last week he wants to move legislation by the first quarter of 2017. This weekend, he sought to reassure the Republican base that the GOP conference is not looking simply to improve the existing law.
You have to repeal Obamacare and replace it with something better patient-centered healthcare, and that is how you repair this healthcare system. I think
this was
somewhere along the line there was a somewhere along the line there was a confusion that we were going to take the Obamacare architecture and, you know, tinker at the margins and repair it. You can't. It is a collapsing law.
Inside the House Freedom Caucus, the same group of upstart GOP lawmakers who helped topple John Boehner from the speakership, the slipping timetable has stirred concern.
Originally, we were going to wait for the retreat. You know, now we're waiting for March. You know, are we going to wait for August recess? I certainly hope not.
It needs to take place this Congress because that's what we told the voters we were going to do.
At a recent subcommittee hearing, House Democrats ridiculed their Republican colleagues for blasting Obamacare for 7 years without having their own system ready to go now.
Every day their timeline changes, and all they've successfully done so far is create chaos and uncertainty among patients and insurance companies.
An aide to Speaker Ryan told Fox News that notwithstanding what Mr. Trump told Bill O'Reilly, congressional Republicans are still working toward the objective of having something signed into law by the end of the spring. Bill.
We will watch it. James, good to see you tonight. James Rosen here in Washington. If you watch a lot of TV or spend any time online, you already know there is stern opposition to President Trump. Fox News media analyst and the host of Media Buzz, Howard Kurtz, here with a report from the virtual battlefield going on in America tonight. Howie, good evening to you.
Good evening, Bill.
Here in Washington, Vanity Fair and the New Yorker have canceled their big parties for the Washington Correspondents' Dinner, which hits around April usually. Is that a big deal?
Not unless you're on the guest list, but it is symbolic of a journalistic disdain for President Trump. Now, Vanity Fair editor Graydon Carter, who started sponsoring these glittery bashes in Barack Obama's first year, now says he's going fishing instead. Washington Post columnist says the Correspondents' Dinner itself, which has drawn flack for being too celebrity-obsessed, should be scrapped because of Trump. Now, all that sends a message that journalists can't treat this president like other presidents. Plus, liberal comedian Samantha Bee, coming to town, she'll be staging a counter-event that same night.
Oh, wow. Is this spreading to other institutions?
It's getting hard to keep up. In New York, the Museum of Modern Art protesting Trump's temporary travel ban by taking down paintings by the likes of Matisse and Picasso, and instead putting up works by artists from some of the predominantly Muslim countries affected by this policy. And this tends to generate positive coverage. The New York Times headline, Museum of Modern Art takes a stand.
Wow. What about the business world? Any movement away from the president there, Howard?
Away from the president and his family. So we have the fashionistas leading the way. Nordstrom's is pulling the Ivanka Trump clothing line. Neiman Marcus stopped selling Ivanka's jewelry on its website. Now, they may point to sluggish sales, but the timing doesn't seem coincidental. Uber faced a boycott threat until its CVO resigned under pressure from Trump's Economic Advisory Council. And, of course, no Hollywood award show is complete these days without celebrities taking a shot at the president, a la Meryl Streep. And, Bill, some sports writers denounced Tom Brady over his friendship with President Trump, which got lots of pregame coverage. Here's USA Today columnist saying Tom Brady no longer gets a pass on his friendship with Donald Trump. Brady is giving tacit endorsement to both Trump and the chaos he has created. Really, the man throws footballs for a living. If you watched him in the fourth quarter and overtime last night, he didn't let this stuff distract him.
What do you think in the bigger picture? What does this add up to?
I think it's starting to add up to a full-fledged culture war against President Trump, kind of a collective thumb in the eye against the new president. Now, obviously, this plays to the liberal crowd in the arts, entertainment, and the media, but it runs the risk, I think, of alienating millions of Americans who happen to have different political views.
Wow, and it's early, right?
2 weeks in.
Thank you, Howard. Good to see you. Howard Kurtz here. The vice president says he is confident the nominee for Education Secretary will be confirmed by the Senate tomorrow. And as of now, Mike Pence has a unique role in the fate of Betsy DeVos. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel has the update tonight from Capitol Hill.
Ahead of the confirmation vote tomorrow, Democrats say they'll hold the Senate floor for 24 hours to protest Betsy DeVos's nomination for Education Secretary.
It is difficult to imagine a worse choice to head the Department of Education.
Frankly, Ms. DeVos's answers at the hearings were embarrassing. Not only for her, but for my Republican colleagues on the committee.
Republican Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska also say they'll vote no. So it's setting up to be a 50-50 vote in the Senate. On Fox News Sunday, Pence said despite the gridlock, he believes DeVos will be confirmed.
It'll be my high honor to cast the deciding tie-breaking vote on the floor of the Senate next week.
There is Republican frustration because at this stage in 2009, President Obama had 11 cabinet secretaries confirmed, plus a defense secretary who continued to serve, while President Trump only has 4 so far. Republicans complain this is the slowest confirmation pace since George Washington. Senate GOP leaders plan to finish 4 more this week: DeVos, Jeff Sessions for Attorney General, Dr. Tom Price for Health and Human Services, and Steve Mnuchin for Treasury. The more consequential fight will come over the nomination of Judge Neil Gorsuch for the Supreme Court. Today, the judge reached out to more Democrats. Gorsuch met with Senator Jon Tester from Montana, who is seen as a moderate and up for re-election next year. And he met with the top Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, California's Dianne Feinstein. Also today, California Democrat Congresswoman Maxine Waters was confronted about tweeting last week her greatest desire was leading President Trump right to impeachment.
I have not called for the impeachment yet. He's doing it himself. Eventually, we've got to do something about him.
It put House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi in an awkward spot.
I'm not here to talk about impeachment today.
A House Democrat talking impeachment 2 weeks into a new administration tells you how toxic things are in Congress right now. The nasty tone is having an impact on everything. Bill?
Well, Mike Emanuel, thank you from the Hill tonight. Thank you, Mike. Stocks were down. The Dow lost 19 points. S&P 500 finished down 5, and the Nasdaq gave back 3 points in trading earlier today. This is a Fox News alert. Fox News confirming a moment ago. We're hearing from the appeals court, the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco. It has ordered 1 hour of oral arguments for tomorrow, Tuesday, February 7th, to take place at 6 o'clock Eastern Time, 3 o'clock on the West Coast. And a recording of those arguments will be available to the public when it concludes. And we are hearing that 3-judge panel will rule soon thereafter. So stay tuned for more information as that rolls in throughout the night tonight and again into the day tomorrow. In the meantime, a U.S. defense official telling Fox News 3 Chinese warships sailed near the contested Senkaku Islands today, 2 days after the new American Defense Secretary James Mattis made a visit in Japan, vowing to defend those islands. The Chinese ships sailed within Japan's territorial waters off the uninhabited islands in the East China Sea. Japan claiming those islands since the late 19th century. China has laid claim as well since the end of the Second World War. They expect the death toll to rise in Afghanistan as survivors dig out from massive avalanches triggered by heavy snowfall in that country. At least 119 people killed in recent days, at least 90 others injured, and 190 homes were destroyed. Israel's parliament has passed a contentious law that retroactively legalizes thousands of West Bank settlement homes. Critics saying the structures were built unlawfully on private Palestinian land. Palestinians condemn the law, and it's expected the fight will go to Israel's highest court in the country. Fighting in that country elsewhere in the Middle East now was at the top of the agenda today when the president made a visit to U.S. Central Command headquarters in Tampa, Florida. Kevin Corke shows us what happened and what was said there today.
The contrast couldn't have been more stark. A raucous, full-throated welcome for Commander-in-Chief making his very first visit to Central Command.
Really, come on, you have to stay.
But the exchange with U.S. service personnel was lighthearted and brief. The visit itself was punctuated by a sobering, resolute address that laid bare the challenge facing the defenders of freedom the world over.
Today we deliver a message in one very unified voice to these forces of death and destruction. America and its allies will defeat you.
The president's tone seemed reflective of the briefings he received today from CENTCOM's senior cadre, charged with degrading and ultimately destroying ISIS. His remarks also seemed to echo January's presidential memorandum, in which Mr. Trump called for a comprehensive strategy to defeat ISIS, a review of any recommended changes in approach, detailed mechanisms to cut off the terror group's financial support, and a detailed strategy to fund the plan, one that his defense secretary doesn't believe will require a major shift in manpower, at least not yet. He didn't mention Iran in his remarks today. The president hasn't minced words when it comes to describing what he's called an increasingly disruptive Tehran.
They have total disregard for our country. They are the #1 terrorist state, and they're sending money all over the place and weapons.
I think he is right in this. I think Iran is wrong in this. They are not conventional ballistic missiles, but Iran has a lot of them, more than anybody else in that area. And the need to test right now, I think, is very dangerous.
The president maintained his support for NATO in his comments today, though he reiterated that member nations need to do their fair share if the existing arrangement is to work. Traveling with the president in Tampa, Florida, Kevin Corke, Fox News.
More deaths in Chicago this weekend. 2 15-year-old boys shot and killed on that city's south side. This is the type of violence that has been repeated over and over in the Windy City. As many debate what to do there about it, a new study suggesting that city leaders and the ACLU might be the ones to blame. Correspondent Matt Finn explains that tonight in Chicago.
Chicago's carnage and murder isn't slowing down in 2017. 51 people were killed last month, an increase from January 2016.
I'm tired of doing funerals. I'm tired of seeing mothers standing over children.
Police say they could fix the crime if they weren't drowning in politics.
Politics is a cancer to good policing, and we're seeing the results right now.
Former police superintendent Gary McCarthy says he was thrown, quote, under the political bus and fired by Mayor Rahm Emanuel. The mayor initially backed police over this controversial shooting video, but flipped his position after it was released. McCarthy's time as the top cop was not without blemish, but he is credited with significantly reducing crime. McCarthy and the Fraternal Order of Police president, in part, blamed the spike in murders on the city's exclusive 2015 agreement with the ACLU. ACLU research concluded CPD was grossly overstopping minorities.
Most of us never saw this, never saw the experiences of black Chicagoans around stop and frisk, that it was harmful to the community.
Officers are now required to document the details of every single stop so it can be compiled by the ACLU.
The timing does fit.
New research from the University of Chicago's crime lab suggests as the ACLU paperwork was rolled out in 2016, police stops plummeted by over 80%, according to police, and crime spiked.
It's the amount of above and beyond type of activity that officers were engaged in that we may not see at that same level ever again.
Hovering over all of this, a Department of Justice investigation into the CPD that painted the department as racist and in need of better training and oversight. McCarthy says the DOJ report was politically motivated, and he wasn't contacted about the department he ran for years.
Attempts were made to reach former Superintendent McCarthy, but he was not available.
You can't tell me they couldn't find me, man. How much trouble did you have finding me? None. So that's just simply a lie.
President Trump has not indicated whether he will enforce that DOJ investigation that was done under the Obama administration. The ACLU says the drop in police stops here in Chicago is a victory, and the police department is to blame for the spike in crime. Bill?
Matt, thank you. Matt Finn reporting tonight from Chicago. After losing the big election back in November, Democrats are trying to figure out who will be the next one to lead them. Control of the party hanging in the balance tonight as Kristen Fisher picks up the story from there.
How bad is it to be a Democrat at the start of the Trump administration? The head of the party in South Carolina explained it like this.
Jesus Christ came back in South Carolina and ran as a Democrat in some of the congressional districts that we have. He would not win. That is how bad it is right now.
Jamie Harrison is one of 10 people hoping to lead the Democratic National Committee away from the crushing losses of 2016 and into a future that can capitalize on the mass protests against Donald Trump's presidency. At a forum Saturday in Detroit, the candidates provided postmortems for why Democrats lost in November and what they would do different as chair of the DNC. Minnesota Congressman Keith Ellison and former Labor Secretary Tom Perez have emerged as the two frontrunners in a race where battle lines have lingered since the presidential primary primaries. On one side, the establishment, represented by Secretary Hillary Clinton and Vice President Joe Biden, who just endorsed his fellow member of the Obama administration. On the other side, the progressive wing of the party, made popular by Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, who back Ellison. It's a struggle for the soul of the Democratic Party, one that will shape it for years to come.
It's very important, I think, for the Democrats to win, to have their generational wheel turn now. It's time for the next crew to come in and take over from an aging group of Democrats here in Washington. It's how the Republicans have done it.
Now, one candidate has already been removed from the race. Vincent Tolliver was kicked out for suggesting that Ellison should be disqualified because he's a Muslim, the first Muslim ever elected to Congress. So the race has already gotten ugly, and it could get worse because the final vote is still almost 3 weeks away. Bill?
Wow, something to watch again. Kristen Fisher, thank you in Washington tonight.
I think it was very smooth. He had 109 people out of hundreds of thousands of travelers, and all we did was vet those people very, very carefully.
Do you respect Putin?
I do respect him.
Do you? Why?
Well, I respect a lot of people, but that doesn't mean I'm going to get along with them.
He's a killer, though. Putin's a killer.
A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent? Do you think our country's so innocent?
So you're not real bullish on Iran at this point?
No, I'm not bullish. I think they have total disrespect for our country. And I understand that deal, I would have lived with it if they said, okay, we're all together now. But it was just the opposite. It's like they're emboldened. Where they follow our planes, they circle our ships with their little boats.
There was a lot to talk about from that interview. I want to bring in the panel right now. Jonah Goldberg, senior editor, National Review. Mercedes Schlapp, columnist for the Washington Times. Susan Page, Washington bureau chief at USA Today, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. And good evening to all of you. No lawyers at this table. That might be a first. You know, oral arguments happen tomorrow afternoon. What happens?
Oh, it really depends on which judges are doing it. I don't know who they are. It's a very left of center circuit, has always been. I would think just on those facts, my guess is that the Trump administration gets bad news from them. But that said, I think that has more to do with the left-wing politics of that circuit than it has to do with the merits of the case. You know, whatever you think of the merits, whatever you think of the actual policy, you know, Justice Scalia used to have a stamp on his desk that said "stupid but constitutional." And I'm not saying that the Trump policy is stupid. I support most of it. But just because people don't like it doesn't mean it's unconstitutional. The president has broad authority in these kinds of areas, both by statute and by the Constitution, to do these kinds of things. And my guess is if it goes to the Supreme Court, which it would if it goes that way, it would ultimately end up in Trump's favor.
Is he within his bounds, let's say? If you go back to 1952, the Immigration Act clearly gave the president authority when it comes to national security and who comes in and who does not.
Right. Well, and that's the case that Donald Trump and his team is pushing forward, which is the fact that, yes, it is constitutional. And also, not only that, but Congress has given the president broad authority in terms of determining who can and who cannot come into this country. There's the U.S. Code, everyone's been talking about it, 1182, saying if it's detrimental to the interest of the United States, they should not allow the entry of foreign nationals or aliens to come into America. So I think, Bill, it really brings up this broader question, which I do think they have a strong legal argument, but I think the politics involved, and you talked about the Supreme Court, think about it, 4-4, if it ends up at a 4-4, because we don't have Gorsuch confirmed, you're going to have the appeals court have that decision and it won't be overruled.
Let me allow Mike Pence from Sunday, Susan, I'll come to you on this, from the Sunday shows, talking about this order here. Watch here.
Every president has a right to be critical of the other branches of the federal government. We don't appoint judges to our district courts to conduct foreign policy or to make decisions about our national security.
He's making that case too, Susan. If it does indeed, as Jonah points out, if it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court, this could take months in a 4-4 court. For now, at some point, maybe Gorsuch is approved. Perhaps that takes longer than some expect. Is there a mechanism by which you can say Yemen, Syria, Libya are failed states, and the U.S. president should have some measure of authority to determine who comes from those states into the United States? In other words, can you do a questionnaire of sorts that would enact more vetting? Perhaps not extreme, but more vetting.
Well, yes. I mean, the United States can set policies that govern immigration, including tough questioning, not just of people from, of people who Americans or the American authorities think could be a threat. Although there is a 1965 law that says you can't discriminate in immigration on basis of national origin. So that may make it somewhat more complicated. Although it's certainly true that the Constitution and statutes give broad authority to the president in this area. I think there is some, on Pence's point, saying that the president's within his rights to be critical of the other branches of government. That's certainly true. That was true also for Barack Obama. You know, the court decision from the Ninth Circuit cited the immigration decision that limited the President Obama's ability to change immigration law by executive authority. So this is a frustration that he is not the first president to feel.
What's the outcome, and how long does it take?
Well, I expect we'll get a ruling from the Ninth Circuit quickly, and I think Joan is right. It's the most left-leaning and the most overturned circuit in the country, so that's likely to be anti the immigration executive order. Then you go to the Supreme Court, which is split to 4-4. If it remains so, then the circuit court ruling stands. Now, there's one in the First Circuit, which is contradictory, so that actually will create problems. You're going to have two circuits and no way to adjudicate it. Although I would say the case for the legality and the constitutionality of the order is so strong that I wonder whether or not one of the four liberal justices in the Supreme Court would not rule for Trump. Again, this is saying nothing about the wisdom of the policy. But in the ruling from the district court judge who issued the temporary stay, he simply asserted what you have to determine if you're going to stay in executive order is to say there was a good chance that the stay would be upheld because the order is illegal. The judge gave no reasoning. He made simply a statement of its illegality. You wonder how they're going to look at that in the Ninth Circuit. But there is nothing there, and it's very hard to make that case. So I think in the end, the legality of it will probably end up being upheld. The wisdom, I think, is still a major issue.
A tweet from over the weekend, this was Saturday, from the president on screen now. The opinion of this so-called judge, he tweeted, takes law enforcement away from our country. It's ridiculous and will be overturned. I think that phrase, the so-called judge, Mercedes, that got the left
I probably would have inserted activist judge instead of so-called judge if I were President Trump. The point he was trying to make there, too, is that this federal judge went too broad on the ruling. The fact is that maybe it should have stuck to just the states that filed the lawsuit as opposed to a nationwide restraining order. And this is Donald Trump. I mean, he does not follow the political rules that we know of not criticizing judges, but he feels pretty strongly that this judge got it wrong, and he was not shy about it.
Quickly, if I could.
Look at the upside. He didn't call him a Mexican judge.
There's that.
Charles.
Jonah, what is the calculation when answering questions about Vladimir Putin on behalf of President Trump?
I am not sure that there is one. I will be on record. I think that what he said about Putin was indefensible. What he said about the United States of America was indefensible. It was wrong on the merits. He's said this several times before, similar things, where he denigrates the United States of America, throws America under the bus to defend tyrants like Erdogan in Turkey, like the butchers of Beijing, and like Vladimir Putin. And I think he has it in his head that this is what serious countries do, is they behave the way Vladimir Putin does.
He has said he wants to get along with Russia.
Yeah, well,
you can disagree and still.
But wanting to get along with Russia in and of itself is meaningless. The point is, to what end? And he says it's to fight ISIS. Great, but that is a more complicated argument, and and they're not exactly the most reliable ally when it comes to events in the Middle East.
Susan, what is the calculation?
And mystifying even to his allies, even Mitch McConnell, who's been pretty careful to be supportive of President Trump whenever possible, distance himself from his comments equating Vladimir Putin with American leaders.
In a moment here, Betsy DeVos. She is up next here. Her confirmation, we expect, well, could be tomorrow. And the timeline is changing for Obamacare. We'll get to all that back with the panel in a moment here from Washington.
The first thing we're going to do is repeal and replace Obamacare.
Immediately, within the first 100 days of my administration.
If we waited 2 years, it's going to explode like you've never seen an explosion.
So this is a 200-day plan. There's nobody talking about pushing this into 2018.
By the end of the year, at least the rudiments, but we should have something within the year and the following year.
Well, that was a span of 4 months, starting on the 5th of October until Bill O'Reilly's interview that was recorded on Friday afternoon at the White House. We're back with our panel on this, and Mercedes. Is the calendar shifting beneath their feet?
Well, welcome to the world of governing. I think for Donald Trump, it's starting to settle in, the reality of it, the fact that it takes time to move forward on legislation. My sources are telling me that they're going to look into a time frame of about March, April in pushing forward, and whether it be a bill. Obviously, you could do 60% of repealing Obamacare and budget reconciliation, so they'll be focusing on that as well. And that means if you're introducing bills March, April, you're really not going to finish by basically July or August. So I think that the Republicans, and most of them, some conservatives are feeling a little different there. They want to take it slow in the sense of ensuring that they get the right plan. At the same time, it's full steam ahead. They're starting to hold hearings. They know they want to move on this quickly. Yes. So they started the hearings in the House this week. They're looking to start hearings in the Senate next week. So they understand that they have to get this right, and it might take some time.
As you well know, there are competing factions within the party, and they are significant. Charles, what is the danger of not getting it done?
Well, there's also the danger of getting it done. Not getting it done is a catastrophe because you ran against it for 7 years and you promised you would do it, and that would be the ultimate betrayal of the electorate. One of the reasons of the rise of Donald Trump is because so many conservatives, so many Republicans said that they had been betrayed by their leaders. This would be the ultimate one. So it has to get done. The problem is that if you get it done, you own the entire system of American medicine. Obamacare is 2,000 pages. It's not one reform. It's 1,000 reforms whose interactions are complex, contradictory, and unpredictable, and that's what we're stuck with now. And it's collapsing. But if you replace, you are going to have to redo all of American medicine all over again, and then you become responsible. And politically, the danger is that you own the system. So if something goes wrong in anybody's life, denied coverage, lousy coverage, no available doctor, etc., premiums increasing, whatever it is, whether or not it's the cause of the replacement bill, you will be responsible for it and blamed. So the Republicans are going to own health care the way that Democrats did for 7 years, and it almost destroyed the party if you look at all the losses in the Obama years.
I think about the time that President Obama spent on Obamacare. Was it 10 months? Every day?
Yeah, he gave a speech, something like 52 speeches in a year on Obamacare, and he never made the thing popular in the first place.
The point is, this isn't easy.
Yeah.
And he said it was a messaging problem.
Right.
The Speaker of the House was asked about this on Sunday and characterized it this way here.
If you're going to repair the American healthcare system and fix its problems, you have to repeal Obamacare and replace it with something better, patient-centered healthcare, and that is how you repair this healthcare system.
This was
somewhere along the line there was somewhere along the line there was a confusion that we were going to take the Obamacare architecture and tinker at the margins and repair it. You can't. It is a collapsing law.
And so there it is. It's collapsing, and it needs to go.
There it is in the House. You know, Republicans in the Senate do not agree with Speaker Ryan on what to do. Chuck Schumer told me last week there was a 50-50 chance that Republicans in the Senate would not be able to repeal Obamacare this year because of these differences and because of concern of what you end up with if you repeal it and you don't have a really firm plan in place. There is no consensus in the GOP now about what would replace it.
All right, he said there was confusion, and apparently he was trying to clear up that confusion. Quickly now, Betsy DeVos. There may be a very unique situation tomorrow where the Vice President, Mike Pence, may be called into the floor of the Senate to cast the deciding vote on her nomination. This is how he characterized it on Sunday.
I'm going to be called on next week for the first time in American history as vice president to cast the deciding tie-breaking vote for a cabinet nominee. Chris, that's never happened in the history of this country, but I think it shows the level of obstruction by the Democrats in the Senate.
Here's the problem. 2 Republican senators said they won't vote for her. So they're right on the margin at 50-50. Does she get confirmed?
She will get confirmed. I don't believe any other GOP senators will not support Betsy DeVos. I think Betsy will be confirmed definitely as Department of Education Secretary.
Do you disagree with that?
No, I think that's right. It's one thing to do what I think is a very ill-conceived protest vote, which is what the 2 Republicans did, and be the 3rd Republican who's actually the one responsible for destroying the nomination. And I don't think any Republican wants to step forward and be that person.
But, huge galvanizing fight for Democrats. This was they're going to lose the vote tomorrow, it looks like. But this has succeeded in really stiffening the spine of Democratic senators who once thought maybe we'd work with Donald Trump on things where we could agree. This opposition from the grassroots and the flood of calls that they've gotten at their district offices.
From the teachers' unions.
From the teachers' unions.
What does that say to the Democratic Party? That the one thing that you can't touch is the feathered nest of the teachers' unions. Right. They call Jeff Sessions a racist, but they're probably going to confirm him. But don't you dare go after the teachers' unions.
She is a big proponent of charter schools. Can you characterize how, if she is confirmed, she will change education in America, or will she?
I don't know if she's going to succeed or not, because she's going to have to take on the teachers' union head on. There's a risk in doing that. On the other hand, the upside is huge. It's so illogical to deny poor kids, particularly in the inner cities, the kind of education that wealthier people, white people, etc., are getting on the basis of somehow it'll destroy public education. I think cannot stand, and if you can pierce that, if you can change it, you will see results. And it's all going to hinge ultimately on whether there are results. And we have never tried school choice. It's about time.
Thank you, panel. Good to see you all. Thanks for watching us tonight. Good to be in your home. I'm Bill Hemmer. Good night from Washington. The first 100 days with Martha MacCallum comes your way next. We'll see you later.